All right, so let's jump right back in where we left off, and that was talking about David. There's a big question, Mark, about David, and that is, was David actually in the actual historical David, was he really a bloodthirsty warlord with great ambition and saw his chance and took it, usurped Saul, took the throne, and then kind of came up with this story of being chosen by God, and Saul was crazy and David didn't want to but just kind of landed in it? Well, there's another side of the story. David he's one of these characters from history, and he's a real guy, right? Nobody really doubts that David didn't exist, and those who do, that's just stupid. David existed. I'm not even going to dignify that. But David's one of these characters from history who really does have a great deal of flaws. But on the other hand, has a great deal of incredible qualities. And the thing is that David is a passionate devotee of Yahweh. The story that you read of when he chooses Jerusalem as his capital, which he conquered, all right, he conquered Jerusalem and made it his kingdom, so more warlord, bloody conflict kind of stuff. Then when he brought the ark in, and the narrative continues to paint David this way, even when David does terrible things. So in this situation, he's dancing before the ark as they're bringing it in with all of his might, such that one of his wives, Michal, says, "You looked like an idiot out there." And David says, "I will look like an idiot all day long, every single day, and twice on Sundays." Or Saturdays, I suppose, because he's Jewish. And so he would have the Sabbath. That may have been in poor taste. Please excuse me for what. But anyway, David says, "I will look like an idiot if it pleases the Lord." Which, of course, if it pleases Yahweh, I'll look like an idiot to anyone at any time. He's a writer of the Psalms. Not every psalm is written by him, but he is a writer of the Psalms. He writes hymns to Yahweh. And the Uriah and Bathsheba story, which you read, it kind of brings these two things together. It's a story of a terrible act. Even think about the way it begins. In the springtime when kings go to war, David woke up in the late afternoon. Now, I'm not a fan of going to war, but the critique of the text is clear, and that's, when kings are out supposed to be doing king stuff, David's sleeping until late afternoon, waking up, going out, and looking out over the Israel homes where they were open. It was like a square, and there were rooms, and then there was an open courtyard. And so on the rooftop, you would go up and you could bathe that way, unless someone's looking like a creep from a tall structure, you could bathe in privacy. Well, David's out there apparently scoping out things, and he knows Uriah, so he probably knows Bathsheba. It's not as though Bathsheba's like, I've never seen her before, okay? Uriah is one of his captains. And so, basically, Bathsheba, we don't know if Bathsheba gave consent or not. But she didn't have a choice. In these times, when kings call for you, that's just what you have to do. You have to sleep with them. It's terrible. David is being a truly despicable human being here. And then, so that he cannot get in trouble for getting her pregnant, tries to get Uriah to come home and sleep with her. when, he's supposed to be on the front, he's supposed to be commanding David's armies, which David's supposed to be out commanding, but he's at home sleeping until the afternoons and creeping on women and basically, committing a kind of power rape, or not even kind of a power rape. And forgive me if that triggers, I don't mean to trigger, but this is what the text says and what it's about. And Uriah won't do it. He says, I got to be with my men. And so David says, well, at least he did come home, so it looks like he could have impregnated her, so now I'm going to send him to the front lines to ensure that he dies, i.e. murders him, so no one can find out what he did. I mean, this is the act of a despicable human being. And then, of course, Bathsheba bears the son, and sons are very important. And so this is when Nathan comes to him, and this is a part of David, though, that's really exceptional. David, first of all, hears the critique of a prophet. David doesn't have to do that. David can just kill Nathan, or banish him, or whatever. He doesn't have to listen to anybody's critique. He's the king. But not only does Nathan does he listen to Nathan's critique, but Nathan convinces him of the despicableness of his act. And the story I told you a story about a sheep and you were enraged. You did this with somebody's wife and then you killed him. And David accepts, I don't know if God really did punish David by taking this son's life. But David fasted and prayed and begged for it not to be the case. But he accepted his sin. Psalm 55, which I think was written by David, has to be, about this moment of the power and evil of what he had been and what he committed. And so we see in David, even though he is a deeply, deeply broken human, he is also truly a man after God's own heart. And the thing is if Samuel is propaganda that's supposed to show how great David is, why does it have these stories that make him so obviously out to be a bad person? So I think both narratives can be true and still represent David as an extraordinary scriptural figure who does end up being chosen, was chosen, and does end up being chosen by God to be the one who bears for his line to be the one that bears forth the Messiah, which is the Davidic covenant, the one that God makes with David when he does dance so passionately in front of the ark. I choose you, and your kingdom will have, from your land I'm going to establish an everlasting kingdom. And so you say, well, with all of this evil, how can David be a saint? How can David be someone who is so honored by God, given that he clearly had such terrible, terrible, terrible qualities? And that is kind of the craziness of the Judeo-Christian tradition, is that God makes saints out of sinners. And there is no one who is too bad for God to bless and use in God's providential plan. That's how Christians would answer it. I'm not trying to get devotional or anything. I mean, this is an academic setting, but this is an aspect of Christian identity and Christian thought. This is something that Christians hold dear in their self-understanding and their self-concept, but also their concept of God, that God can make sinners into saints. That God can take the darkest of hearts and make light shine in and through it. That is something that the Judeo-Christian tradition desperately believes about God. And so, far from, I've seen people who want to defend David. I have no stake in that. Why defend him? He's obviously a creep and a murderer. But somehow, God can take a creeping murderer and make that person into someone as also grand as David. And so I don't defend David. I accept that he was a man of God who was deeply, darkly broken. So, even though, however, that David is this grand hero chosen by God, he's not allowed to build the temple. He establishes the kingdom of Israel. He's not allowed to build the temple. Why? Well, God tells him, you're a man of blood. You're a killer. You cannot build my temple. And David accepts this. Now, what is interesting about this story is that the one who does build the temple and the one who does end up succeeding David is a son that he has with Bathsheba. Now, it's not the first son. That first son died. But then they do have another son, and it is Solomon. And Solomon is just the king's king of Israel. If we trust the dimensions of the kingdom, he expanded the kingdom to larger than it ever was or ever would be again in Israel's history. It was huge. And he was apparently famous for his wisdom. This is a depiction of the Queen of Sheba coming to from Ethiopia to meet with King Solomon. And he did end up building the first temple. So this is a depiction of the area of Israel. You see Eretz Israel, that's Hebrew for the land of Israel. And so this red is what modern day Israel would have been like. And then this, or what it is, I think, I'm not sure how up to date this is, but this is more important. This is basically what David and Solomon were in control of at the time. And you can see Jerusalem should be like right around, yeah, here-ish. I can't really read that, but it should be around there. This is the kingdom. And then, of course, they're going to build the temple. The temple is based on the same dimensions and structures of the assembly, the tent of assembly, the tabernacle, the place where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. The Ark of the Covenant, we haven't really gotten to talk much about that, but that's where the Ten Commandments were kept and somehow bore the presence of God. And we just can't get into how that works. But here's the temple. So this is the structure it probably would have been if the record is trustworthy. Solomon's first temple. So you've got this altar of incense, this pyre all the time, and then you've got a basin that's for washing. So the priests would wash themselves before entering into the holy place. All right. Now this is where. So only Levites, the priestly tribe, only Levites could even enter into this area, okay? Only Levites, no other Jewish people, and of course no women. Sadly enough, this is not the way they do things. And so only Levites could enter into this area. Now, to go into the holy place, this area, only Levites from the line of Aaron could go in there. And so you can see, and here's like the menorah and stuff, and then this is the veil, the thing that divides all of the rest of the temple to where the Ark of the Covenant is, where God dwells. And the only person who can enter into this area, the Holy of Holies, behind the curtain, behind the veil, is the high priest. And he can only do it once a year on Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement. And he goes in there, he splatters some blood, and then he leaves. And that's it. Okay. And so that's how they kind of did it. Now, what is the deal with the temple, though? Why a temple? Well, temples have some pious reasons and they have some practical, political, and economic reasons in the ancient world. They are a geographical center of kingdom. Remember back to the lecture before, kingdoms are tied up in religion. And so if you want to use religion to kind of make you make your kingdom um, concentrically ordered towards your base of power, well, the temple is a great way to do it, especially if people have to come at some point to sacrifice at that temple. And that also makes it kind of a bank because people will have to pay money to use this temple if they don't have, the proper sacrificial animals or whatever, which we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this a lot actually when we get to Jesus, because the temple is an extraordinarily important um, um, symbol and structure in the story of Jesus. And it is acting very much like a bank, with money changing and everything. So, and then of course it is a ritual locus of sacrifice. You gotta, so yeah, there are these cynical things about history. There is this, sense of like, man, everything is really just a power play and blah, blah, blah. Yes and no. These people also, they did these things. They were smart about it. They used strong symbols like temples to consolidate power. Of course they did. But they also could be very devout people. Right? Humans are not just one thing or another thing. Every king of history is not just a jerk or evil. They're complicated people. And so the temple also was a place of ritual sacrifice. Why? Because according to, and Wright really helps, the reading from Wright should really help draw this out. The temple is the place where God lives. Right? Now, of course, they don't think God lives there in the sense that he's kicking it in there, watching the tube and, ordering pizza. No. But this is a meeting place of the divine and the created world. At this place, this locus, this center, God meets us. And the priests go in our stead to mediate that to us. That's what temples do. All temples. This isn't just I shouldn't say all temples. All religions have various ways of thinking about temples, but one of the primary ways of thinking about temples in religious thought is that this is the place where the divine is meeting us. And for at least some of the higher church traditions, not higher in the sense of more valuable or better, but just that have a kind of a elevated sense of liturgy in their worship, like Catholics or Eastern Orthodox, or to some extent, Anglicans or Jews, Anglicans or Lutherans. Why I said that? Because I'm talking about Israel, have this sense of, we go to, for Catholics, right? We go to Mass and we watch this sacrifice being performed. It's not like a literal sacrifice. It's a celestial sacrifice that calls back into this place and time, the sacrifice of Christ. But yeah, we're going there to meet God. And that's what temples do. And so the temple is not just, nobody looks at not nobody, but from kings to paupers, they look at that temple and they see it as something of extraordinary importance, because it's where God meets them. And this is why the temple becomes the structure of Israel's identity. And so it is still the case. The Wailing Wall. Still, Jews go and wail at that wall because it's the last remaining piece of the Second Temple. It wasn't Solomon's temple, it was later. But they don't have a temple anymore. So they can't carry out the law fully because they're supposed to have the temple so they can carry out sacrifices. So this is a key, an absolutely central structure and symbol of Jewish identity and Israelite identity. If you haven't noticed, I tend to use Israelite when I'm talking about the ancient Israelites, and then Jewish, kind of more talking modern, but still we'll talk about, I'll also use that for the ancient as well. But when I say Israelite, I specifically mean the ancient Jewish people and traditions. But anyway, so I think we'll stop there. I think we've got the point across. But that should set us up pretty well for the next stage. So we've been through creation, we've been through the fall, we've been through the covenant, and now we've just been through the kingdom, which includes this notion of temple. Next week, it's going to be the exile, and it's going to be the periods that leads us up to Jesus. And so that should give us a good sense of where we've been and where we're going. And so I will see you next time. Take care.